Good morning. I am Mary Soni, Research Officer at Chennai Center for China Studies. Welcome to another episode of C3S podcast. As we enter really early 2026, the relationship between Japan and China, which is traditionally defined as hard economics and cold politics, has reached a critical breaking point. Following the Japanese Prime Minister's 2025 remarks on Taiwan contingency, we are no longer just seeing diplomatic disagreements, we are witnessing the weaponization of trade. From China's new 2026 dual-use export controls to Japan's tightening of semiconductor equipment exports, the two largest economies in the Asia are actively testing each other's resilience in a way that threatens the global security. Understanding this specific issue is more critical than ever. To discuss this topic more, today we have with us Dr. Gujjeti, Assistant Professor at Symbiosis Law School, Pune. I am glad to introduce our guest, Dr. Gujjeti. Dr. Anidip completed his PhD in political science from University of Hyderabad, focusing on India-Japan relations in the post-Cold War period. He studied through neoclassical realism. His research explores how domestic and systemic variables influence foreign policy. He worked as an assistant professor at the Center of Excellence for Geopolitics and International Studies, Reva University, Bangalore, India. Dr. Anadeep has also worked as a research associate and consultant at the Council for Social Development, Hyderabad, contributing to key projects such as the Telangana government's SDG Vision 2030 and the UNICEF-sponsored report on child-related indicators in Telangana. He has convened ISSSR-sponsored national seminars, including Status of Health Indicators in Telangana since 2014 and Listening to Freedom Fighters. He was selected as a young leader in the spring 2022 cohort of the Pacific Forum's Young Leaders Program, USC. He is also a member of the Indo-Pacific Circle, a curated network of early and mid-career scholars shaping the emergent narratives of the region, hosted by the Council for Strategic and Defense Research and the Center for Policy Research, New Delhi. Dr. Anadeep's articles have been published in reputed outlets like India's World, The Diplomat, The Hindu Business Line, Telangana Today, Indian Express, and Orca India. His research interests include Indian and Japanese foreign policy, Indian foreign policy, Indo-Japan relations, the Indo-Pacific international relations theory, digital diplomacy, world order, and non-traditional security. I'm glad to have you here today with us, sir. And we would love to hear from a few words regarding the topic today from you, sir.
Thank you so much, Viri. Thank you for such comprehensive introduction and for inviting me for this podcast. I'm looking forward to it.
So without any delay, I'm going to my first question. How did Japanese Prime Minister's 2025 remarks regarding a survival threatening scenario in the Taiwan serve as the primary catalyst for China's 2026 trade relations? And why does Beijing view economic leverage as its most effective tool for preempting the remilitarization?
Just to put in context for our viewers, Prime Minister Sanai Takechi's comments in late 2025 fundamentally altered the tenor of China-Japan relations and set the stage for Beijing's trade retaliation in 2026. As we all know, in early November 2025, Prime Minister Takechi stated in the Japanese parliament that a Chinese military attack on Taiwan could be a survival threatening scenario for Japan, potentially warranting a Japanese military response. This marked the first time a sitting Japanese leader explicitly outlined a Taiwan contingency as grounds for Japan's collective self-defense. Such language broke with the past administration's careful ambiguity with related to Taiwan. So Beijing was outraged. It interpreted Takechi's words as a signal that Japan might intervene militarily in a Taiwan conflict, a scenario China views as crossing its red lines, right? So Chinese foreign ministry immediately demanded a retraction of the erroneous remarks and warned that Japan was reviving the specter of wartime militarism. Prime Minister of Japan stood firm and refused to retract her statement. This was bolstered by the domestic approval as well. For example, Asahi polls showed that 55% of Japanese respondents supported her tough stance. But because of the remarks, by late 2025 and also into 2026, China rolled out a multifaceted attack on Japan's economic interests, which is short of a military conflict. Some of the key decisions were to include issuing a travel warning, urging Chinese citizens not to visit Japan, halting imports of Japanese seafood, postponing cultural exchanges, and also suspending flights by major Chinese airlines to Japan. See, these steps hit Japan's service sector immediately. Chinese tourists were the top spenders in Japan. And after Beijing's November 14 travel alert, Chinese hotel bookings in Japan plummeted to almost 57%. So tourism makes up around 7% of Japan's GDP. So in that case, China's travel boycott delivered a sharp blow to Japan. And with this, Japan's message was clear. If Japan inches towards a military posture, China will exact economic pain. So the trade retaliation part that we were talking about peaked in January 2026 in this month with more direct measures targeting Japan's high-tech supply chains. If I can recollect, on January 4, 2026, China's Ministry of Commerce suddenly announced export controls on dual-use items to Japan, which essentially bans exports of goods and materials that can contribute to Japan's military capabilities. So it was the most severe China-Japan dispute in years. These rare earth minerals are vital inputs for Japan's electronics, automotive, and defense industries. And if you look at it, China has near monopoly in this sector and gives it a powerful economic weapon as well. So if we are speaking in realist terms, Prime Minister Takaichi's Taiwan remarks were in a way catalyst for this retaliation, but China also used this as an excuse to show uh, how serious it is about Taiwan. So, uh, and also Chinese officials explicitly linked their moves to her statement, calling it the root cause of the crisis. If I can, put some stats into perspective, Japan is heavily dependent on China economically, than vice versa. China is Japan's largest trading partner, supplying everything from industrial components to tourists as well. In 2024, imports from China made up 22.5% of Japan's total imports. It's the biggest share for Japan. And China was the destination for 17.6% of Japan's exports. So Beijing clearly understands this asymmetry and uses trade and investment ties as pressure points. And second, there's a historical precedent as well. This is not the first time that's happening. Uh, China has shown that economic coercion can check Japan's strategic moves. If we go into history in 2010, after a clash over Senkaku and Diaoyu Islands, China imposed an effective ban on rare earth exports to Japan and bringing some Japanese manufacture at that time to the brink of shutdown. So in 2010, China supplied 90% of Japan's rare earth imports. And fast forward to 25-26, China is reprising that playbook again by threatening Japan's access to critical minerals and technologies. By this, Beijing hopes to undermine Japan's ability to uh, rearm or project power. To conclude, I just want to sum it up in some way that why economic leverage? Primary question. Because it is scalable, it is reversible, and it is asymmetric. Japan is structurally more dependent on China than China is on Japan in several supply chains and in consumer facing sectors such as tourism. So, China's theory of coercion is that it can manufacture domestic pressure inside Japan, such as business lobbies, affected prefectures, downstream manufacturers, thereby raising the political price of any kind of security talk on Taiwan and while avoiding at the same time an escalation which involves military.
Okay. So, can you specify what are the strategic advantages China gains from targeting Japan's economy, semiconductor supply, and rare earth export?
Right. So this would be a logical extension of what we spoke earlier. China's decision to target semiconductors and also rare earth minerals in its retaliation against Japan is far from coincidental. These are among the most strategically vital sectors of Japan's high-tech economy. By zeroing in on these areas, Beijing exploits two critical leverage points where China holds outsized influence over global supply chains. By this, China tries to maximizes pressure on Japan while minimizing any kind of direct conflict. So, the strategic advantages China gains include economic, technological, and also geopolitical advantages. For example, rare earth elements and semiconductor materials are the lifeblood of any advanced manufacturing, not just in Japan, but also in any part of the world. Japan's automotive, electronics, and defense sectors cannot function without a stable supply of these inputs. By threatening to curb exports of rare earths to Japan, China is effectively trying to choke Japan's tech manufacturing prowess. See, this is despite Tokyo's efforts to reduce reliance since the 2010 scares. Japan still depends on China for about 60% of its rare earth imports. For certain heavy rare earths like dysprosium, terbium, which are used in neodymium magnets, which are used in electric vehicle motors, wind turbines, and even in guided missiles, Japan is almost totally dependent on China. This near monopoly gives Beijing enormous strategic clout. If China tightens rare earth export licenses or halts supply, Japan factories producing these electric motors, batteries, or aerospace components and other high-end products could face crippling shortages within weeks. And also, targeting semiconductors and rare earths also allows China to deal with a measurable blow to Japan's economy and bargaining leverage. For example, analysts at some grouping, some organizations such as Nomura estimate that a 3-month rare earth export curve, which is similar to 2010's incident, could cost Japanese businesses around 600 billion yen, which is approximately around $4.2 billion. And it would affect 0.11% of Japan's GDP. But a year-long ban happens, then the GDP cut would be around 0.43%, which is almost $16.5 billion. See, these figures underscore how severely rare earth disruption could hurt Japan's economy and thereby giving Beijing the bargaining chips.
Okay. For a person or for a state, if they have some person behind them in a very critical situation to help them, it's a very good for them, right? So, in comparing to international relations, when President Trump is pursuing a stability first trade policy with China in 2026, what are the risks for Japan if Washington prioritizes its own rare earth supply over Tokyo's interest when it comes to China?
Right. Yeah. So this is one of the important points to be noted, that the return of President Donald Trump to the White House following the 2024 election has introduced a new dynamic in US-China relations that has direct implications for Japan. By 2026, this year, Trump administration has shifted towards a stability first trade approach with Beijing, invariably seeking to dial down the trade wars of the late 2020s in favor of negotiated truce and also commodity deals. So, in practice, this has meant Washington is keen to stabilize supply chains, including critical minerals like rare earths, and avoid new economic confrontation with China, at least on the trade front. See, while this approach might secure short term benefits for the US, it carries significant risks for Japan, especially if the US ends up prioritizing American supply needs over allied coordination. Right. So the one of the important issue would be Japan's strategic isolation. If Washington puts its own rare earth supply security above all else, Japan could find itself isolated in dispute with China. A stability first mindset suggests that US might be reluctant to jeopardize its fragile trade understanding with Beijing by intervening strongly on Japan's behalf. If you remember, Trump reportedly asked Prime Minister Takaichi not to escalate the dispute with China any further. From Japan's perspective, such urging, however well intended, might indicate that Washington's priority is its own deal with Beijing, not resolute support for Tokyo's position in relation to China. So the risk is that Japan's leverage diminishes if China perceives a wedge between US and Japan. And this also means there is a reduced US advocacy in Japan China rows. See, traditionally, US Japan alliance has been a pillar of Japan's security, including in economic coercion scenarios. For example, behind the scenes, the US helped Japan during the 2010 rare earth crisis by facilitating alternate supplies. However, under an America First understanding, Trump might calculate that confronting China over its treatment of Japan isn't worth imperiling a US China understanding. This could manifest a muted US response to China's economic coercion with Japan. For example, if China severely restricts rare earth exports to Japan, Washington might respond by simply ensuring its own rare earth stockpiles and its sources are secure, rather than coordinating a collective pushback against Beijing. In 2025, we saw hints of this. The Washington negotiated China's agreement to issue general export licenses for rare earths such as gallium, germanium, and other critical minerals, effectively for a 1 year suspension of China's export controls on these items. See, something of that can happen again. And in concrete terms, if we can say, Japan risks supply insecurity and economic damage if Washington doesn't coordinate. So that's a taking point.
Okay. In the context of US self-interest, when in the current scenario, how in every region there is a clash of clash between the states are happening. In your opinion, is there a possibility of escalation between China and Japan in the East Pacific? What is the future holds for Japan and China? What is your opinion on that?
Right. Yeah. So tensions between China and Japan have undoubtedly reached a new peak in the 2020s. No doubt on that. It raises concerns about potential escalation in East Asia. A region already is on the edge due to various flashpoints. While both nations will likely try to avoid an outright military clash, given the catastrophic risks, the possibility of escalation cannot be ruled out, especially with ongoing frictions over Taiwan and East China Sea. Yes, there is a real possibility of escalation, though it may more likely be unintended or gradual rather than a sudden declaration of war. A few scenarios and indicators highlight that risk. For example, Taiwan can act as a trigger. The issue of Taiwan has emerged as the single most combustible factor in China-Japan relations. Japan views Taiwan's security as directly tied to its own. The phrase Prime Minister Takaichi used, Taiwan contingency, as a survival threatening situation, reflects Tokyo's stance that a Chinese invasion of Taiwan could imperil Japan's national security. Beijing, meanwhile, considered any Japanese involvement in Taiwan as crossing a red line, as I was mentioning earlier. Now, Chinese forces might take a provocative action near Japan's southwest islands under the pretext of Taiwan drills. Indeed, in December 2025, the Chinese Liaoning Aircraft Carrier Group conducted extensive drills near Taiwan and Japan's exclusive economic zone, even locking a fire control radar onto Japanese SDF aircraft. This was a highly escalatory move. Essentially, it was simulating an attack. One can imagine an incident where a Chinese fighter jet or naval vessel and a Japanese counterpart collide or exchange warning shots in these tense environments. Such an incident could spiral. Domestic nationalism on both sides would surge, and demands for firm response could pull the countries towards an open conflict. The East China Sea, where Japan and China dispute the Senkaku or the Oyo Islands, is another flashpoint. There are frequent encounters between Japanese Coast Guard and Chinese ships around these islets. A misstep or an accident can quickly escalate if not carefully managed. Now, both countries are rapidly enhancing their military capabilities in response to the perceived threats from each other. Japan is in the midst of historic military buildup, doubling its defense spending over 5 years, acquiring long-range strike missiles, fortifying its southwestern islands with anti-ship as well as anti-air missile batteries, and even considering deployment of hypersonic missiles in the future. It has also loosened some interpretations of its uh, pacifist constitution to allow for collective self-defense with allies. At the same time, China, for its part, has grown its navy into the largest by the number of ship count. It regularly probes Japanese airspace with military aircraft and has been expanding its nuclear arsenal, reportedly with Japan's vicinity in mind, as not just the US. So this arms race dynamic means more military assets operating in proximity with heightened risk of an incident. Both militaries are on alert. For instance, Japan reported that in 2025, Chinese military aircraft approached its airspace at a record pace, and Chinese Coast Guard ships have equipped with bigger guns. If you look at those ships, if we keep on observing them, they are increasing these in numbers. So uh, uh, escalation is possible if missteps occur. The East China Sea and Taiwan are flashpoints to watch in the East Pacific. However, both sides will likely try to retain the conflict to diplomatic and economic arenas only, is what I believe.
Thank you, sir. So the next will be my last question. Looking into the wild overall picture of international stuffs today, both India and Japan have historically avoided rigid bloc politics. India through non-alignment and Japan through its specific constraints. In the current climate, what is their shift in foreign policy reflect, and how is that going to shape the regional equilibrium, possible challenges in change, etc., and what will be their current opinion or response towards the currently happening situations in the world?
Right. So India and Japan are two major Asian democracies and are indeed undergoing significant foreign policy shifts in response to today's strategic environment. Now, historically, as you mentioned rightly, India championed non-alignment, distancing itself from Cold War blocs, while Japan did not avoid bloc politics but maintained a low-profile defense posture under its post-war pacifist constitution.
Yes.
Now, faced with an assertive China, global power shifts as well as regional security concerns both are moving towards a more assertive and aligned posture, but in its own distinctive ways. India has not formally abandoned the non-alignment doctrine. Now it uses the term called strategic autonomy. But in practice, New Delhi has gravitated much closer closer to the US and its allies at any time in the past. This shift accelerated after border clashes with China, example the 2020 Galwan clashes, and due to China's growing presence in the Indian Ocean as well. Now, India's foreign policy is often described as uh, plurilateral omni-alignment or a move towards multi-alignment. Now, essentially, India is willing to work in tighter groupings with like-minded countries on specific issues rather than staying equidistant. So there is a clear-cut understanding here. The clearest example is India's enthusiastic participation in quadrilateral security dialogue or Quad. This is alongside with Japan, US, Australia. See, a grouping like this is unthinkable in the non-aligned movement days. So through Quad, India coordinates on maritime security, technology, and infrastructure initiatives to counterbalance Chinese influence. Moreover, India has upgraded its defense cooperation with the US, whether it's the signing of logistics and intelligence sharing pacts, or also in terms of conducting joint military exercises than ever. For example, Malabar naval exercises with the US, Japan, Australia significantly deepened ties with India has significantly deepened its ties with Japan itself, including bilateral military exercises and talks of joint development. But at the same time, India retains aspects of autonomy. For instance, it continues to buy arms and oil from Russia, as seen in 2025. Right? Japan's transformation in a way has been dramatic. Though it still is constrained by Article 19 of its constitution, Japan has reinterpreted and legislatively adjusted its defense policies to take a larger security role. Now, this shift began under former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, who according to analysts, followed a proactive pacifism and has continued. Now, now it is charged under the pressures of North Korea's missiles and China's military expansion. If we look at Japan's 2022 national security strategy, which explicitly called China its biggest strategic ally and committed to reaching NATO level defense spending. Like I was mentioning earlier, already Japan is deploying large scale missiles.
Yes.
Is considering strike capabilities and expanding the role of self-defense forces beyond homeland. Now, this is a sea change from a generation ago when Japan refrained from even peacekeeping missions abroad. So, politically, figures like Prime Minister Sanai Takahashi represent a more hawkish strain in Tokyo, willing to speak openly about confronting China if necessary. Now, this is completely a different ball game altogether. Japan has also shed some reluctance in forming security alliances. For example, to put everything in context with regarding to Japan, besides US alliance with Japan, uh, Japan is increasing its ties or deepening its defense ties with Australia. A quasi alliance intelligence sharing is happening there. And with UK and Italy, a partnership to jointly develop next generation fighter jets. And of course, there are relationships in India. So, in 20, and at the same time in 2023, if I remember correctly, India and Japan conducted their first joint fighter aircraft exercise as well. And so, uh, despite avoiding the terms like alliance, the Quad plus other partnerships effectively constitute a loosened coordinated bloc of democracies which counterbalance China. Now, this is a significant change. Uh, if I have to conclude, the shifts in India's and Japan's foreign policy reflect a broader adaptation of the realities of multipolar and a contentious world order. Both are stepping out of its constraints. India is aligning more openly with powers like Japan, US, and Japan embracing a more proactive defense role to protect their interests against common challenges. Now, this will shape the regional equilibrium by strengthening a multi-nation partnership against a unilateral aggression, which is China. And at the same time, likely contributing to a balance of power in the Indo-Pacific. This region could be more secure in terms of deterring conflict, but it also faces the challenges of managing great power frictions in the region.
Um, that's all my question. Thank you so much for your response, and it was very much informative. Uh, do you have anything more to comment on the current relationship between China or Japan, or in anything? So,
Uh, See, first of all, I would conclude by saying thank you for inviting me for this. All I want to say is that the, because you pointed out to at the end towards India and Japan collaboration, I would, because I work on India and Japan relations, the India and Japan histories interestingly positions them to lead a different kind of alignment. So one based not on any coerced membership or ideology, but on shared strategic interests and values. So now this is how nations are going to function, mostly on shared strategic interests and values than on ideologies. So that is how the world order is going to shape, is what I believe. So we have to look forward for how national interests are being understood by various nations and how are they reacting to it.
yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir. So, can we end this section, sir?
You sure, yeah. Thank you so much for inviting me once again.
Thank you so. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.